here's my test jar. It's about 80% volume increase. So what I've done is I just split them. This is about 20% first proof and 60% second proof. This is about 40-40. And this is roughly 60% during the bulk fermentation, rise in volume, and then 20% in the second proof and final proof. So I've skipped most of the work and just show you the results. Basically, I'm just testing whether when you bulk ferment, if your bulk ferment is the same as your final proofing, or whether it's better to bulk ferment shorter and then have a longer extended final proofing, or the opposite, where it's better to have most of the fermentation of your dough happen during the bulk fermentation and then have the final proof just add a little extra oomph. So you would think theoretically, if you shape the dough and then you do your final proofing, you may degass it. So technically and theoretically, a dough that has been shaped early on and had an extended final proof would be airier and more open crumb than a dough that was expanded nicely and then you shaped it tight and it didn't have much strength left to ferment. Ooh. From a glance, the short bulk fermentation had the most rise, and it's hard to tell the difference between the half bulk fermentation and the long bulk fermentation short final proof, just looking at the outside. So as you might expect, the first loaf that was proofed shortly for the bulk fermentation has a larger, more open crumb, just because it's had more time to open up during the final proof. This is somewhere in between just one random irregular hole. About half and half. And this was bulk fermented longer at the expense of a shorter final proof, which meant that the shaping was towards the end of the total fermentation time, so it didn't have as much time to open up after it was shaped. And as you can see, the crumb is much more even. All of these had roughly 8 hours of total fermentation time. This was probably about 5 hours bulk ferment. It's probably about 6.5 maybe. This is almost 8. To recap everything, just like I thought, the loaf that was bulk fermented short and then shaped had a long time to open up after the shaping. The one that was about 50-50 had a moderately open crumb, and the one that was shaped towards the end of bulk fermentation and then the final proof was shorter because the bulk fermentation was longer, that one had a much more even crumb. You can tell it's not tight, not necessarily dense, it's just that all of the larger bubbles were evened out and there was a bit of degassing, so it couldn't recover and re-puff up during that second rise because the first rise was long and it ran out of a lot of rising power. Last loaf ran out of proofing because it used most of its proofing power in the first bulk fermentation and it didn't have much on the second final rise, so it's very hard to tell on camera and in this lighting, but it's actually still quite a nice crumb. If you want a more open crumb, it's better to degass and shape, not necessarily attempt to degass, but to shape it earlier in the bulk fermentation when it doesn't have much to lose, and then it can spend the rest of the total fermentation time puffing up. But if you shape it with a long bulk fermentation and a short final proof, then you will have a lot of gas in your dough by the end of bulk fermentation. It could be degassed, and once you do shape it, you won't be able to regain that open crumb because it just won't have that much more rising to do. So just to put it simply, if you do 25% of your bulk fermentation, of your total fermentation, that means you still have 75% after you've shaped it for it to puff up. If you do 50% of your bulk fermentation time and then 50% of your final rise, then you will moderately degas it when you shape and it will moderately puff up. And if you have 75% of the fermentation time being your bulk ferment, then once you do shape it, it will be degassed and you won't be able to puff up your bread dough with that last 25%. It just won't be enough to open the crumb back up.